Hello, my name's Alan Macon. I'm the local history tutor for Nosley Face, with a continuing series of local history videos on the history of Nosley towns and settlements. This short video will look at the history of Stockbridge Village, which local people formerly called Cantrell Farm. We'll look at its geographical location, land ownership, how it developed over time, how new ideas about building developed from either side of the Second World War, and the actual people who went to live in Cantrell Farm, which became Stockbridge Village from the mid-1960s onwards. And we'll also look at some buildings in the area. So firstly, I want to look at general history of Stockbridge Village. So you can see from the handout, Stockbridge Village is a relatively new community. Formerly, it was known as Cantrell Farm until the 1980s, but the land in which it stands has a rich history. So people just think Cantrell Farm dates in the 1960s. Before that, it did exist for hundreds of years, but it was a very, very small settlement. Stockbridge, as it was originally appeared on maps, after which the lane and eventually the township was named, was originally a wooden bridge which crossed the River Alt, the local river. It was named as a boundary as early as 1189, so way back in the Middle Ages. I'll just zoom in. This is a map in the early Victorian period, and you can see how rural the edge of Liverpool was, and you can quite clearly see Stockbridge, and became known as Stockbridge Farm, and the land surrounding it, Liverpool Lodge, and the date 1847. So that's to give you an idea of how rural the area was around Stockbridge Village, well into the 20th century. Another geographical location would be two maps, one of Stockbridge area from 1900, the late Victorian period, and the other one will be a modern satellite map of Stockbridge Village and its development in 2016. So again, I will zoom in, and hopefully you can pick out some local landmarks. Yew Tree Cemetery, but still very much rural. As you move further east, there's a mention of the River Alt. Eventually we come to familiar names, Stockbridge Farm, and we keep on going. So that's an idea of what the area looked like in around 1900. The second, to zoom out then zoom back in again, the second is a satellite map, a modern map the last few years. And obviously you can quite clearly see the modern development, modern housing, but still quite a green area, and how the buildings were laid out in the modern period of Stockbridge Village. Right. So we continue to the history of Stockbridge Village. So the Domesday Book of 1086 records that Uchtred, a Saxon, held the land around this part of Lancashire, southwest Lancashire. The ownership of the land then passed to the de Leyden family until about the year 1385, when a lady by the name of Isabella de Leyden married a John Stanley, and the lands passed to the Stanley line. The Stanleys were the old name of the more familiar Earls of Derby, who still live, and their descendants still live in Nosley Hall. So we move on again in time. The Nosley Estate, the actual lands, covered a huge area, including Stockbridge or Stockbridge Farm, which we saw on the maps. These were farmed by tenant farmers and farm labourers, worked the lands, while others were employed in other labour on the Nosley Park Estate or Nosley Hall itself. A similar situation existed for those who worked for the Earl of Sefton at Croxteth Hall, something we've mentioned in previous videos. The rural agricultural life of the majority of the local inhabitants remained the same for hundreds of years, and this would have been the same for most parts of Britain. Two major issues took place in the 20th century to transform the area, the sleepy little area on the edge of Liverpool. Firstly, increased overcrowding in Liverpool in the 1930s onwards. By 1931, the census showed that Liverpool's population had reached its highest ever, at 850,000. A lot of people were living in poor housing, So from 1930s onwards, slum housing clearance schemes added to the need to find locations for housing outside the city. Secondly, the Stanley family, 2 members of the Stanley family died in the 1930s, and they needed to pay death duties and decided to sell off their land to meet these death duties. Large tracts of land were sold to then Liverpool Corporation in the 1930s, before the Second World War. As we move on, thereafter, new housing estates began to appear in Huyton, Halewood and Kirkby, something we've covered in previous videos. So if you're interested in Huyton, Halewood and Kirkby, it's been covered in previous videos. By the 1950s, discussions were underway between Liverpool Corporation and what was then known as the Wiston Rural District Council regarding a new site development in what was still called the Cantrell Farm area. One of the controversial proposals in the 1950s put forward by the then Liverpool architect was to increase housing density in Cantrell Farm development by building 15 and 22-storey high-rise blocks. Eventually 9 blocks were sanctioned to be built. The decision was made to build the Cantrell Farm estate on what was called at the time the Radburn layout design, named after Radburn in New Jersey, America, back in 1929. These were new architects at the time, a couple of